Good evening all, and welcome. I apologize for my absence, more of that at the end. For now, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Sinister Sally for joining us in tonight's installment. You can find links to her channel in the description and at the end on screen. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I had been living in Prague for about a year. I taught third grade at a bilingual school during the day and worked door security for a tourist bar at night. Weekends I would get off work around 3 or 4 depending on how busy it was, at which point I would take the tram from the city centre to JZP, where my apartment was located. At the time I was around 22, I had short black hair and round glasses. This is important. One night I stood at the back of the tram, my headphones in despite my phone being dead. They were like a security blanket to prevent me from socializing with drunk English speakers that populated the city centre at this time of night. This group of 7 guys looking to be between 25 and 30 were getting loud and drunk. I'm okay with accents, and these guys were definitely British, probably there for a stag do. I ignored them until I hear this conversation. "I'd screw that Harry Potter looking girl. Like she screwed you, mate. Like I'd give you a choice." Raucous laughter, then high-fiving over the little rape joke. "How can you even tell it's a girl? One way find out, isn't there?" And more laughter. I kept staring at my Kindle and acting like I couldn't hear them or speak English, but internally I was screaming in panic. My stop was only 2 away, and I figured I'd wanted to be as close to my flat as possible when I got off. So I sit there ignoring the leering until the tram gets to my stop. I get off. I've got 3 blocks up and half a block over to get to my flat. They get off. That's fine. I live 2 blocks away from a very popular club, and quite a few bars and hotels are in that area. So I rationalized to myself, they're not following me. I had a test. A stupid thing I did to see if people were walking behind and following me. And I crossed at a weird place in the street. They crossed. I picked up my pace to be walking fast but not running. They pick up their pace and laughter emanates from the group behind me. But I refuse to look back. I make the 3 blocks with them steadily closing the gap to me. Then I turn left and bolt, running as fast as I can, keychain with rock in palm and building keys between my thumb and pointer knuckle. I slam the door, and even though it locks automatically and doesn't have a turntable handle, I throw the deadbolt and continue running to my flat, where I also turn the deadbolt. I get to my room, which faces the street, and I curl up in the corner, shaking, as through my open window I can hear, "Where'd she go?" along with other things that I'm not going to share. After about 15 minutes, I hear them leaving. So yeah, you group of British boys, let's not meet. And for those of you wondering why I didn't have pepper spray or a weapon, those kind of things are harder to get for a foreigner. I did have a rock keychain on the end of my lanyard that I figured could do some damage, and my boyfriend got me a knife for my birthday last year. This, of course, was after the encounter, so I'm all kitted up now.
Just reposting this because I didn't post it in sections last time, so they took it down. So, this isn't super interesting or anything, but I saw a post that reminded me of it. About 8 or so years ago, when I was a sophomore in high school, I took the bus all the time because our school gave us bus passes. One day I was coming home pretty late from a school event, and I remember getting off the bus across the street from my parents' apartment. You have to walk behind a restaurant and then walk across the street to a field before you get to the apartments. This field was pretty big, and between the back of the apartments and right before the field is a bigger parking lot with little stores like Domino's and Tim Hortons, etc. As I was walking across the parking lot before I got to the field, I felt eyes on the back of me. I had both of my headphones in, and I turned around, and there was a guy walking behind me. Not close, but not far. He could have chosen to walk up on the sidewalk next to the field, but he was directly behind me on a phone. When I turned back straight, there was also another guy in front of me on the phone, coming from the other side of the field, on the side where I lived. I don't know why, but I got freaked out. You could tell I was a young teenage girl because of my stature, and I had a school book bag on. My boyfriend at the time worked at the McDonald's at the end of the street, so I took off running towards it. I didn't stop or look back once, and once I got there, I banged on the door like a maniac, as their dining was closed. He let me in, and I decided to stay until he was off so he could walk me home. I called my dad once I got inside and told him why I wasn't home. The asshole didn't believe me and told me to get home now. I told him to walk to Mickey D's and get me if he was so pissed, and he said I was going to get my ass beat when I got home. Needless to say, I waited until my boyfriend got off and I walked home with him, and didn't call my family or tell them where I was for 3 days. Maybe then he would believe me next time.
Back in the early to mid-80s, I had a paper route in a medium-sized southwestern Pennsylvania town. This would have happened around 83 to 84, so I must have been around 13 or so, depending on the year. I was out one night collecting the subscription fees from my customers. It was winter because I remember the sky was dark, and I don't remember there being snow on the ground, but I was usually done collecting by 6:30. That was on purpose, because the penguins usually came on around 7. It was cold, and I had decided that I wanted a hot chocolate for the walk home. There was a convenience store near my paper route. Even now at night, the area is fairly busy, with cross-town traffic for a dead-end southwestern Pennsylvania town. Well, I head on over into the store and got myself a nice cup of hot chocolate. I paid. As I was walking out of the lot, a dude in a pickup truck with a cap over the bed called me over. I figured for some reason that he recognized my paperboy receipt book and thought that I may know the area. 13-year-old logic, I guess. I supposed he may have been asking for directions. There was some traffic, and the lot was well lit, so I didn't feel any fear. I head over to the truck, and there were 3 occupants. A guy much older than me, but not as old as my dad, and 2 cute girls who I recognized as older than me. But I didn't know how much. The dude looked straight at me and said, "These girls want a party. Get in." Direct quote that I'll never forget. Now I'm 13 or so, pimply as hell, and weighed about 90 pounds, soaking wet, with 20 pounds of sand in my pocket. These 2 chicks want to party with me? Sure, I'm a horny 13-year-old, but I'd seen a lot of videos in school. This stuff was screaming stranger danger. I politely declined and started walking towards my house. The dude sweetens the deal. "Hey, she thinks you're really cute, and we have weed and beer. Just get in and let's go." I again declined politely. This whole time the girls have said nothing. I started walking up the road towards my house, and the dude pulled out of the lot and began following me in the truck. A couple of 100 feet up the road, a rail bridge with a retaining wall crossed over the road they were on, and on the other side, I could go through a very small wooded area into my neighborhood. I went up the embankment and started crossing the tracks. I could see down onto the road, and the dude was leaning out of his truck and looking back at me. Well, I kept walking, and I saw him pass the first turn into my neighborhood. Good. I was home free. My house was 3 blocks up from the bottom of the hill, and I ran like my life depended on it, when it very well may have done. I got to the 3rd block, and what comes over the crest of the hill? A pickup. It wasn't moving very fast or anything, so I easily made it to the front porch of the duplex before it passed. I told my dad about it a few days later, and he freaked. For a month he insisted on driving me along my paper route until I was done. The first time a guy in the car pulled up alongside me, he asked if he could buy an extra paper from me. My dad pulled up and yelled at him to move along. Fortunately, I never saw the truck again.
This happened almost 4 years ago, in the early hours of New Year's Day. For reference, I was 17 at the time and in my senior year of high school. I'm a male and I'm about 5'10" and weighed about 160 pounds at the time. I lived in the suburbs and I was at a New Year's party being held by my friends at his house, which was a 20-minute walk away from my house. It was about 1 in the morning and I was just about to leave with another friend of mine who lived on the same block as me. My friend who was hosting the party asked if we would like a ride home, and in hindsight, we probably should have accepted his offer. But our neighborhood was pretty safe, and we figured with the two of us walking together, no one would bother us. Plus, there were probably other people at the party who needed a ride home more than we did. We said our goodbyes to everyone and began our walk home. The road was predictably empty with no one but us walking along the sidewalk, and maybe the occasional car passing by. It was pretty well lit though, so we weren't walking in complete darkness. My friend wanted to pick up a pack of cigarettes on the way home, so we stopped off at a gas station along the way. When we got to the gas station, it was nearly empty with only a woman at a pump filling up her car with gas, and a guy posted up in front of the store on his phone. We went inside and my friend picked up a pack of cigarettes. We walked out of the store and my friend immediately lights a cigarette. We reach the sidewalk and we hear someone yell behind us, "Hey, wait!" We looked behind us to see the guy who was in the front of the store quickly walking towards us. He looked to be in his early to mid-20s. He was probably about 5'8" and maybe 140 pounds from the looks of him. He approached us and asked if he could get a light. My friend and I didn't think much of it, and he lit the guy's cigarette. The guy thanked him, and my friend said, "You're welcome." We began walking away when the guy continued to follow us, asking where we were going. We told him that we were heading home and asked him where he was going. He said his friends were at a party and he was heading back over there as he left to get some fresh air for a bit. He asked us if we wanted to come to the party. This is officially the point where red flags start going off with this guy. Why the hell would a guy in his 20s ask 2 teenage boys if they wanted to go to a party with him? We told him bluntly that we didn't even know who he was, nor did we know anyone at the party he was talking about, so we weren't going. He starts laughing and says that we seemed like really cool guys to party with. He told us we needed to let loose a little. My friend and I told him we were 18 and 17, respectively, to see if that would maybe get him to leave us alone. He chuckled and said that age didn't matter to him, and that he had a brother who was 16 and that he partied with him and his friends all the time. Jesus Christ, can this guy take a hint? I thought to myself. We were a little less than 10 minutes away from our houses, and we didn't want this creep following us the whole way there. I told him firmly, "Dude, we're not going anywhere with you. Now quit following us and fuck off." He gets livid and starts screaming at us for being unfriendly, inconsiderate assholes, and that he was just trying to be nice. He then starts throwing racial slurs at my friend. It's probably worth mentioning by now that I'm white and my friend is black. My friend yells at him to get away from him before he cracks him in the face, and the guy proceeded to run away from us. My friend and I looked at each other in complete disgust over what happened and spent the next 5 minutes walking and talking about the creepy guy. We both agreed that he was probably drunk or high from a New Year's party. Next thing we know, we hear a car behind us and proceed to slow down to match our pace. We see the windows roll down, which reveal the guy we had just seen a few minutes earlier, with who we presume to be his 2 friends. One of which was a man who was probably the same age as the guy, and a woman in the back seat who had to have been in her mid-30s. The guy tells us that we got off on the wrong foot and asked us again to join them at the party. My friend and I looked at each other and I whispered to him that we needed to get away from them. My friend tells him that we're not going with them and to leave us alone already. The guy was silent for a few seconds and said, "You're coming with us, one way or another." They pull over and quickly get out of the car, which caused my friend and I to immediately go into flight mode. We turned right on a side block and my friend yelled, "Run to the park, we'll lose them in there." We looked behind us and to our horror, 3 people were running right for us. We run into the park and we once again look behind us and they're getting closer. We run into the dark, thick patch of trees that covered a good portion of the west side of the park, hoping to evade them. I was panicking at this point because I couldn't see a damn thing, and I was worried that my friend and I would trip over something and get captured by one of those sick freaks who wanted to do who knows what with us. We hear one of them trip and fall behind us, yelling, "Fuck!" And luckily we see light again, and we made it to another path in the park, and we made a left onto the path, We heard yelling behind us, and one of the guys said that they lost us. The woman yells to split up and search around the park for us. We bolt towards the bathroom, which thankfully was open, and we hid inside. We took a minute to catch our breath as our lungs were actually burning at that point. We should have called the cops and just hid until they got there, but at the time, we were so focused on getting the hell away from those crazy people that we decided to try and make our way to the nearest exit out of the park and run to my house. We waited for about 2 minutes, and we bolted out of the bathroom and toward the park exit. Shortly before we exited the park, we heard one of the guys yell behind us that he found us and we were getting away. We looked behind us to see the guy in the distance starting to chase after us. We ran until we reached my house, and I quickly opened the door. We ran inside, and I quietly locked it. We went into my living room and collapsed on the couch. We both sat there silently, trying to regain our energy and calm down after what had happened, hoping they didn't see where we ran to. I looked out the window several times over the course of 10 minutes, and thankfully, they never showed up again. We talked about it, and we were glad that we were both okay and that nothing bad happened to us. We were trying to figure out what they wanted to do with us. Did they want to kill us, rob us, have sex with us? God only knows. My friend hung around for another half hour before he insisted on heading home. He left, and I went to bed. I kept thinking about what had happened and pondered on what would have happened if they caught me. Even as I'm typing this, I still have those thoughts. I eventually fell asleep, and I woke up and told my parents what had happened. They were thankful that my friend and I were okay, but were upset with us that we chose to walk home and should have accepted the lift from my other friend or even called them and they would have picked us up. Regardless, we filed a police report and I gave them all the information I could. Unfortunately, we never heard anything about it again, and I wonder sometimes what the hell they've been doing ever since. I really hope they never harmed another person after that. I can't express how thankful I am that we managed to get away from those freaks, and to this day, this incident is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. This incident definitely made me more wary of my surroundings, and I try my best to avoid situations where I need to walk late at night, whether I'm by myself or not. I don't know what would have happened had those people got their hands on me, but I do know one thing. I never want to meet those people ever again.
This happened to me 10 years ago. I was riding a bicycle from one city through a lane. It was 10 p.m., and this was after hanging out with friends. Before I was leaving, they told me for lols, "Hey, better not go through the lane. There might be guys in a van waiting for you," and then talking about you inside the van. You see, the teachers in the first few grades of elementary school always told us not to go into cars or vans of strangers, and then they might take us and beat the crap out of us, and I'm like, don't worry, see ya. So I'm riding home through a one-way lane, when suddenly I see a van going against me. I thought it was some random car, because it didn't have their lights on and it was really dark. Then a man suddenly turns the lights on in the car, and it slows down. I pass through, and 5 seconds later they shout at me, "Hey you!" I turn back to see a van with doors open and two 40-year-old guys. I stopped and asked, "What?" One of the guys just shouted, "Come over here. Why don't you come?" I was thinking about what the teachers always told us, and I jumped on my bike and continued cycling as fast as I could, pulling the lame, "I don't have time." "You don't have time?" he responds. "I'll get in the van, turn around, and I'll bet you will." I'm like, that's it, they're coming for me. I was 2 miles away from where I lived, as I lived in quite a small village. In a few streets there were no lights, and I turned around while riding as fast as possible and see they rotated the van, but it still wasn't moving. The fact that I hadn't ridden a bicycle in 4 years due to physical injury was quite disconcerting, but I rode as hard as I possibly could, faster than I ever have before, and I turned back every 5 seconds to see if they were coming for me. Fortunately, they stayed stationary on the road, but I didn't stop pedaling until I made it home. I'm not sure if they were some criminals or angry people being stuck on a forgotten road in the middle of nowhere, but for a 15-year-old kid, what the hell could I have done to help them?
Longtime lurker, first-time poster, on mobile. About 10 years ago, I was working as a waitress at a local diner and living in a low-income apartment. The apartments were brand new and beautiful. To this day, it was the nicest apartment inside that I've ever lived in. I lived on the 3rd floor. Outside, it looked nice-ish as well. The landscaping was kept up, and they had these tall and thick, pretty flowering hedges that wrapped around the building. But due to some drug activity, it wasn't always the safest, and it was normal to see needles, burnt and bent spoons, condoms, and all that kind of stuff. We also lived right on a river, close to a downtown area. Less than a mile away, there were some homeless shelters and a place called the Daily Bread, where anyone in need could go for a meal. So, it wasn't unusual to see homeless people on the road outside of my apartment complex, or sleeping on the benches by the playground. They never bothered me. I usually worked mornings at my job, but every once in a while, I would fill in for someone on the swing shift, 4 to 11. I usually kept my tips in my apron for a few days and then deposited the money on my way home. This particular Sunday, our busiest day, I had worked the morning shift and done really well. So, when I heard they were short-handed for the swing shift, I volunteered to work a double. I ended up doing really well on that shift as well, and clocked out at 9:30, which about $250 in my apron. I stopped at my bank to make a deposit through the ATM and got home around 10:15. I pull up and see that I have a spot fairly close to the stairwell. It's dark, but I can see that there's no one else around. I park and walk past the hedge and turn right to go up the stairs when, out of the corner of my eye, I can see a man between the hedge and the building. I look to the right and I can see that he is smoking a cigarette, wearing jeans and a black shirt, and he is covered in paint, like he was a house painter. He looked like he was on drugs, wide-eyed and a little crazed. He saw me look at him. I felt creeped out because I had not seen him from my car and was wondering why he was standing out of the light and hiding behind the hedge. So I start to take the stairs, 2 at a time. I get to the top of the first flight of stairs when I hear someone following me. I look back and it was the man. We make eye contact and he was already halfway up the stairs running at me. I started running too and freaking out internally, because even if I beat him upstairs, I might need to unlock my door. My roommate and I usually kept it locked. I keep running as fast as I can. When I get to the top of the second flight, he was like 4 steps behind me. I run harder and debate screaming for help. I get to the top of the 3rd flight and I'm still 15 feet from my door and he is almost on me. I can hear him breathing hard. His eyes were bulging. His arms were outstretched to grab me. He was a foot away from me. My apartment was still 10 feet away. I inhale and open my mouth to scream as loud as I can for help when my 6'4", buff as F construction worker neighbor opens his apartment door to come out for a smoke. I let out a scream that starts in horror, but trails off in relief as my neighbor sees what is happening and starts running to me. The man turned right around and sprinted off. My neighbor chased him to the 2nd floor and then ran back up and yelled for his girlfriend to call the cops. At this point, I am a hyperventilating, crying, and shaking puddle on the ground. My neighbor comforts me and then gets my best friend/roommate to come help me. I thought that man was going to catch me and hurt me. Looking back, it's more likely he was trying to rob me because I was still wearing my work apron, and it was late. We made a police report where the cop told us that a day labor company for the homeless had a painting contract that they were currently working. Cops made a point to start doing more drives through that complex. My roommate and I bought mace and started calling each other to come watch the other person come upstairs if it was dark at night when we got home. So, to the man covered in paint and hiding in my hedges, let's never meet again. Never, ever.
I was probably around 10 or so, and I think this happened in 91. I lived in a rural area, and my elementary school was on the street over, and I rode my bike there and sometimes played. One day when I was riding home, I noticed a white van, similar to a 1990 Ford E150 cargo van, had matched speed with me. I'm a kid on a bike. I'm not going near the speed limit, so I know something's weird. I try to think of a plan of what to do because I'm in trouble. So I start pedaling as fast as I can and the van speeds up to me. Luckily, I'm at the end of a street and turn left, cross a bridge, left again, and one of my friends lived on the first house of that street. His dad was home with the garage open, so that was good. I remember his dad wondering what was up. He seemed concerned but didn't ask. Just said that my friend wasn't home, as I briefly look over my shoulder and see the van continue past me. I went inside to use the restroom, but really I just needed to relax. The whole event from noticing the van pulling up was probably 2 minutes or less. I didn't get a good look at the driver at all, and that's the part that bothers me in hindsight. I think I didn't want the driver to know I noticed him or he may react. I didn't tell my parents either, or they probably wouldn't let me ride my bike out. But it ended up that I didn't feel safe riding my bike anyway. There were no reports of child abductions that I heard about, so hopefully it was just a misunderstanding. Or did I avoid a grim fate, and the driver was too scared to try again?
I grew up in a pretty shady neighborhood in a pretty crappy town, but I was given a lot of realistic independence as a child, so I was fairly street savvy and relatively fearless. I started riding public transportation to and from school by myself when I was 8 years old, and I've seen the gamut of creepy weird stuff on the bus while waiting at the bus stops. I was pretty used to freaky dudes trying to pick me up while I was at the bus stop or walking alone. But the creepiest was the time I was nearly abducted. I was 15 years old and sitting at a bus stop at around 7 a.m., about to go to school. The road was a main highway, but at the time of the morning, it wasn't very busy. That area is kind of a business area, so before business hours, there's almost no one around. It was kind of foggy, so I was already worried about the bus driver not seeing me at the stop, and I was keeping a vigilant eye out for it. An old beater pickup truck passed me on the opposite side of the street, but did a U-turn and came back towards me. I already became annoyed, knowing it was going to be some pervy loser mistaking me for a prostitute or trying to pick me up. He pulled into this driveway that was right next to the bus stop and hollered, "You need a ride, sweetie?" "No thanks, I'm waiting for the bus." "Come on, baby, get in the car. Save yourself $1. "No." He was super creepy, and his voice sounded much more insistent than most of the weirdos I encounter. I leaned forward and looked past his truck out onto the road for the bus, and he pulled his truck forward, blocking my view. I shot him a death glare, and he looked back with the most gut-wrenching, nauseating expression. This man had very bad intentions. I tried to show no fear, but in my stomach, I was beginning to panic, trying to come up with an exit strategy. He kept up the insistent chatter that I accept his ride, and I coldly ignored him. He kept inching his truck closer to me, making it more and more difficult for me to see out into the road. But there in the distance, through the fog, I could see the bus coming. "My bus is here, so get lost." He looked back over his shoulder at the approaching bus, then looked back at me with a chilling grin. My eyes nearly popped out of my skull in fear and surprise as he expertly timed pulling his truck out in front of the bus, causing the driver to swerve, honk, and speed away, without seeing me. "Get in the car." I could hear him roar as I sprinted after the bus as fast as I have ever run. I could hear the rumble of his old truck pulling into the road and driving after me. "Wait!" I screamed in desperation after the bus, which was still speeding away from me. The man in the truck victoriously drove alongside me, taunting me. Much to my relief, I saw brake lights on the bus, now almost a block ahead. My legs went into overdrive, and I finally got onto the bus, utterly shaken. When I got to school, I went straight to the bathroom and sobbed. Basically, a release of adrenaline. My confidence, or cockiness, had gotten me that far, but that event was a major reality check for me. I still rode the bus every day and moved about town without caring, but I carried an easily accessible pocket knife at all times, just in case.
Every summer, with a few friends, we take a trip to the seaside of France for about a week. Last year, we decided to go to Hossegor on the southwestern coast for surfing, but ended up in a small touristic village called Molliet-et-Mas, an hour from where we were supposed to be because of a messed up reservation. The week was going okay until the last 3 days of the trip. So the past 2 days we had been in trouble with the police and a few other tourists because of some misunderstandings over a pack of cigarettes. We had spent the last 2 nights stressing and trying to cool off, and therefore we thought the last night we spent there wasn't going to be as bad as those 2. And it couldn't possibly be, as we were leaving the next day very early in the morning, so we had only planned to go to a restaurant for dinner with some friends that we had met there to celebrate the trip. The dinner was going great. We were all having fun, and as time passed by, it started to get dark. Towards the end of the meal, my best friend Dennis, who was driving us home the next day, thought it would be best for him to leave early and not drink too much so that he could sleep as soon as possible and be in the best shape for the long drive that was coming. He left about 15 minutes before the rest of the group. While we stayed and drank a bit more, we paid with the check. And as soon as I got up from my chair, I received a message from Dennis. "Call me. There's a guy following me." Here's what happened. Dennis had to pass through a caravan parking lot and a Golf to get back to the residence, in which we had rented a house. While he was in the parking lot, he noticed someone behind him that was about 1.7 meters, roughly his size, with a hood and a cap on it. At first, he didn't think anything of him, as the village was actually quite touristic and there were a lot of people usually passing by the car park. But when Dennis stopped to pee on a tree, he had a glimpse of the guy behind him stopping and hiding behind another tree a few feet back. As soon as he got walking again, the guy stepped out from behind the tree and started following him again against the Golf. As Dennis got there, he was a bit creeped out, especially since at night the Golf is completely dark and only illuminated by moonlight. It is completely devoid of people, and he stopped again for a second time to light a cigarette and check if the guy was still behind him. Once again, the guy stepped out of the path and hid behind a tree, until Dennis started walking again. That's when he understood he was in danger. This guy wasn't physically imposing, and so Dennis thought it was weird. He was so confident in following him. Maybe because he was holding onto a knife or gun. Nevertheless, Dennis kept walking and acting as if he hadn't noticed anything, although the guy was following him again and sent me the message, "Call me, there's a guy following me." As soon as I picked up, he spoke loudly to try and scare off the guy. "Hey, you're at the Golf with the other 8? No problem, I'll be there in a minute." Even though we were 5 and absolutely no way near the Golf, it was terrifying for me. But it was clever because it made me understand he wasn't joking, and where he was. I swore to him that everything was going to be okay, and that I would be there in 5, and told him to be careful and try and get home safely. As soon as I hung up, I began running towards where he was and explained very briefly to my friend that Dennis was in trouble, and that we had to get there ASAP. Meanwhile, when I hung up, Dennis put the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. He took a glance back and saw the guy that was still a few meters behind him. He took a last puff of the cigarette he had lit 2 minutes before and threw it to the ground and began running towards the residence. As he was running, he took a look back and saw the guy began running too. The chase lasted 5 minutes before he got in front of our house, which was empty. When he got there, he stopped for a second, looked back, and the guy was 10 meters behind him, in the middle of the alley, immobile. and then went to hide behind one of the cars that were on the side of it. As soon as Dennis saw that, he panicked, barged into the house, locked the door with difficulty, and grabbed the biggest knife he could, and waited on the couch, facing the entrance to the house, which was a glass canopy. When me and my friends got there, he was scared but unhurt, and he explained everything to us. We then went looking for the guy. The neighbors hadn't seen anyone other than us, and even though we got to the residence at first in separate groups at different times and through the 2 different entrances, we didn't see anyone coming out of them. He had completely vanished. Nothing was stolen, even though we had left clothes to dry outside, and nobody was hurt. So we didn't call the police, but warned the neighbors, and me and 2 others stayed up all night outside as lookouts for the guy, as he had seen where we lived, and we were afraid he'd return during the night. Dennis had been lucky. We never knew what were the intentions of the guy, or if he was hiding something that gave him the advantage over my friend. Furthermore, he didn't even try to get into the house, and good for Dennis, because there was another entrance to the house, another glass canopy that led out to one of our friend's rooms, which had not been closed correctly. We couldn't even understand why he did that. Did he want to steal from Dennis? Or maybe something worse? We didn't call the cops back then, because of the trouble we'd had with them over the past 2 days, and the problem with the pack of cigarettes. Also, after those 3 days had gone wrong, we just wanted it to end and go home and sleep. I regret not calling them now, but it's too late, and I hope the guy hasn't creeped on anyone since.
An incident happened over the Christmas break when I was working late at my job. There had been a spate of recent kidnapping attempts where my parents live, but I was determined, stupidly, to not let that stop me from working the late shifts. My shift finished at 3 a.m. and none of my colleagues drove, at least none on that shift. So I ended up walking. The pub I work in is on the seafront and is close to a lot of clubs and bars, so it's often swarmed with people, so it feels safe to walk down. But the further in town you get, the darker it gets and the less people there are. Not even cars drive through very often. There's a Waitrose on the corner that leads up towards my road, and it has a few high walls surrounding it, and I could see 3 guys jumping along the wall. They'd been at the pub I work in a few hours before drinking, so I recognized them as I had served them. As I walked past them, they shouted at me. I had my earphones in, but they weren't playing music, so I could hear what they said. My mom always tells me that since I walk alone at night, I shouldn't listen to music, and I'd never listened to her before this Christmas break, and so I put them in but never listened to anything. As I passed them by, not answering them, they muttered something about following me. I'd never experienced a moment of anxiety quite as intense as I did in the moment of hearing that, and then seeing their shadows sticking close behind me on the road was adrenaline pumping. After 2 roads and a moment of clarity, I thought to call someone, or at least to pretend to be on the phone. So I tried calling my mom, but she didn't answer. Though this seemed to do the trick, I saw them turn their heels and walk briskly in the opposite direction. When I was walking around the corner from my house, I called the police. Thinking about the recent kidnappings and assaults that had been occurring, I thought it was a good idea to call the police and report it. And though I was still rattled, I managed to be coherent enough to begin a report. A day later, I finished the report, and the police told me that no one was found in the area, and that nobody had reported anything else, so I felt relieved in regard to that they haven't appeared to hurt anyone else. I have never had anything that terrifying in my life happen, at least in the sense of I have never been properly followed by someone late at night. I've had people follow me around shops in the town during the day, and I could shrug them off, but nothing like that in the early morning alone on the streets. Stay safe out there, guys, and don't walk at night with earphones in. I certainly won't be doing that again.
When I was a child, I was always stricken by this irrational fear that when I went outside at night, I had to walk straight into the house without looking back, because if I looked back, someone would be following me. One day after dinner, I went out to the car to get my book bag. I was continuing my ritual of walking straight inside without looking back. Adrenaline pumping, anxiety going full force, and I just stopped and said to myself, "This is stupid," and I made myself look back. When I looked back, I saw what appeared to be someone crouched down behind my mum's car, peeking their head around. They were just staring and smiling. It appeared to be a woman between her 30s and 40s with curly blonde hair. We made eye contact for a second, and then she ducked behind the car where I couldn't see her. I stood frozen for a second and then ran inside. I told my mum, and she went outside to check, but of course no one was there. My mum didn't exactly not believe me, but she wasn't very concerned either. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, please be sure to let me know down below. And if you liked Sinister Sally's work, you can check out the link to her channel in the description, and that will be shown on screen in a little while. Sorry for no weekend video. Did I post on Friday? No Friday video either, I don't think. And yeah, nothing yesterday. It's been a hell of a few days. We had lots of legal stuff to sort out with Leonora, paperwork, and, when you give birth to a child, there's a few things that you have to do. And of course, Pandora got sick Friday, so that sucked. She's still ill, she can't go to school, preschool, nursery, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, we've just been kind of having to deal with that. Just trying to do everything we can to make her feel better. Her nose is just so runny. I spoke to the school, and a number of kids are sick as well, so I think that's probably where she got it from. But we always knew schools are kind of like, well, they're kind of like breeding ground for diseases, aren't they? It's kind of inevitable. But yeah, it's been a challenging few days, so I'm really sorry. We should be on schedule again now, I hope. But yeah, just the unexpected curveballs that life throws at you, eh? Hope to see you again soon, hopefully Thursday, which is when the next video will be released. May poll this next one, let you guys take a pick. Alright then, thank you all for joining me, and of course to my members and patrons whose names are on screen. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.